Welcome to Big Talk. Today we have Mr. Carlos Gutierrez with us. He is chairman of Albright Stonebridge Group and the former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. He will talk with us on U.S. trade with China and, of course, Chinese economy. Welcome, Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you. Pleasure.
My first question is, what is the biggest heritage you left for Sino-US trade when you were the Secretary of Commerce?
Well, I believe what we did was to establish a formal dialogue that increased the understanding among the two countries. And not just talking about trade issues, which we did, but understanding each other. Those dialogues were the JCCT, the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade. I was part of the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. And all those, I would call them institutions now, are an important part of Chinese and China-US relations, and above all, understanding.
You've mentioned about the China strategic and economic dialogue mechanism. Do you think this kind of bilateral talks is the final solution to solve problems between the two nations?
Not final. It's not the final solution, but it is a means to an end. It is a means to discuss priorities, to understand each other's issues, and then to reach a conclusion on next steps to be able to execute whatever agreements there are. So it's not the final step, but it's an important intermediary step to get to a final solution.
Okay. Where do you think China and U.S. trade will go in this post-recession era?
I think it will go higher and higher. There are a lot of opportunities. The big one, of course, is in addition to technology and traditional manufacturing, we have a tremendous opportunity to explore for shale oil and shale gas. That is the next big industrial revolution. And in the United States, we have started to extract oil through hydraulic fracturing and through horizontal drilling, which is also a new technology. That could form the basis of an increase, a substantial increase in the commercial relationship between the U.S. and China, because China also has shale oil and shale gas deposits. So that's a very exciting event, exciting reality. It's very new. It just it was discovered in 2005. But the partnership between the U.S. and China can be very instrumental in making sure that both countries use that technology to grow and to prosper.
Yeah, right. But we are seeing China and Russia getting closer in industry, energy industry areas, like you've mentioned shale gas.
Yes.
What do you think American could play in this China-Russian partnership? Can U.S. get a cut from it?
Well, we can't impact the Russian side. Our relationship with China would be U.S.-China, and of course China has relations with Russia as it does with a lot of countries. But what we can do, U.S. and China, is to share technology to enable China to take advantage of its shale resources, to have partnerships, to have joint ventures. We think that's very exciting, and we think that is a big opportunity for the whole world to solve energy needs for the next 20, 30 years.
You've mentioned, Mr. Gutierrez, the export of technology from U.S. to China. Do you think the service export from the U.S. side could power enough to offset the huge deficit between the two nations' trade? I know because most of the trade come from goods exports which China has more, I should say, advantages between in this partnership. Do you think the technology and the service that exports could,
It could work very well. A big part of our trade deficit is due to oil. So again, going back to shale, that will help us. It will help the U.S. But in terms of services, there are always opportunities. One, of course, being financial services, and China's reform of the financial services market will help our service exports. The other part that's helping our service exports with China is tourism. There are a lot of Chinese tourists in the U.S., and that is also, interestingly, considered an export. So, yes, services can play an important part. I think manufacturing is so big that also has to be part of the solution.
Yeah, the two nations have some fractions between each other in both military and economic fronts. Especially here in China, some U.S. tech giants are having hard times in China because of government procurement bans or monopoly probes. Do you think these kind of hurdles will, means that U.S. companies are finding themselves harder to penetrate into Chinese market?
Well, we've had frictions in the past. We've had misunderstandings in the past, and we have been at this for over 40 years, and we've been able to solve whatever tensions we've had on the economic front. There is concern today in the anti-monopoly law. Not sure how it's being applied. There's a sense that perhaps it's an aggressive application, but I'm sure that with dialogue we can resolve that, as we have resolved so many other issues. So it should not be a reason to be pessimistic about the future of China-U.S. economic relations.
How will you address China-U.S. relationships at this particular moment? Is this more friendly, or will it see more frictions?
I think we are going through a period of friction, misunderstanding, but again, we have been through those periods before, and we have been able to resolve them and move forward. So I wouldn't consider that the current state of things is a permanent status quo. I'm sure that we'll be able to resolve the misunderstandings.
How long do you think this fraction thing could last?
It's hard to say how long these things last.
Well, do you think both sides are, willing to getting things well?
Oh, I believe that both sides understand that it's to the interest. It's to the interest of the U.S., it's to the interest of China. We have mechanisms, as we said before, the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, the strategic and economic dialogue, dialogues that we have all the time, the two governments. So I don't know exactly how long it will take to resolve. I can just tell you that I am convinced that it's not permanent.
Mm-hmm. Now the world is heavily debating on when China could surpass U.S. as the world's largest economy. Another competition here. Well, I want to see your take on this topic.
Well, it's a matter of when. In terms of absolute dollars of China, there's no question. China has been the largest economy before, and it will be the largest economy again. And that has been very good for the world. It has created jobs in China. It has created jobs around the world. It has increased prosperity. So that's been a very good thing. The rise of China has been a very positive thing. Now, it creates competition, but in business, there's always competition. But competition makes everyone better. So it's just a matter of time, but China will become the largest economy in the world. I was reading the other day, in the United States we sell approximately 17 million cars. I think China is around that number, but by the year 2035, China will have 41 million cars. So the numbers are staggering, and the potential of China is almost limitless.
I'm glad you mentioned about job creating of China's growth, but there are some debates back in the States saying that trade with China could cost U.S. jobs instead of adding them. What's your take on this?
Well, if you live in a specific town and a factory in that town has to close because of trade, then your experience with trade has been very negative. But for the country as a whole, trade with China, I believe, has been positive. And we need to do as a U.S. government to have policies to ensure that when small communities are impacted by trade, that we're able to help them restore growth to that community. But overall, for the national picture, trade has been positive.
What will change and what will not change after President Obama announced, the strategic shift back to the Asian Pacific region?
Well, the Asia pivot is more of a geopolitical, Navy, military type of activity. That's not my area of expertise. I believe that every U.S. president understands that in the 21st century, the key relationship is U.S. and China. I believe President Obama understands that. President Bush understood that. And I don't believe any president in the future will be elected that can't understand that or doesn't understand that. And to put that in jeopardy would be a mistake for both sides and a mistake for any U.S. president. So I think the relationship is permanently important.
Do you think the U.S. military presence here around China could, potentially hurt both countries' trade and economy?
Well, again, I'm not a military expert, but we have been able to separate at times geopolitical aspects, geopolitical strategy from trade. And with some countries where there have been geopolitical discussions, trade has continued. And I think it's important that we not create a link between discussions that may be taking place at a geopolitical level with discussions that may be taking place on the trade level.
The negotiations of building the Trans-Pacific Partnership Consortium, which kicked off when you were the Secretary of Commerce in 2005, well, we will see a little progress right at this moment here. What are the values of the TPP for the U.S. and its members here in Asia?
The TPP originally started very small. It was the U.S. and some South American countries, Australia, New Zealand, Brunei was part of it, Malaysia, and then expanded to include Mexico and Japan. That makes it bigger, but it makes it more difficult. So I think it's a long-term process. I don't believe it's going to happen next year. Negotiations will start. The negotiations with Japan have slowed down. So it's a very long-term initiative. And somehow we should link that to the Asia-Pacific free trade, what some people call ASEAN +3 or ASEAN +6. It's important that we not create competing regional trading blocs. And unless we're careful, that can happen. So we should be talking about how to combine those two initiatives.
Right. Of course, China backed off from TPP because some conditions or not meet China's demands. Do you think China could someday join this organization, or there's no chance for China to join?
No, I think one day China and the U.S. will have a free trade agreement. We're starting today with a bilateral investment treaty. That is usually the first step to build the foundation. But yes, I can see that, of course, in the future, and I can see that perhaps you can combine NAFTA with the Asian region, and there are a lot of things that we can do to expand trade for the benefit of all.
There are a number of regional trade agreements in talk with other countries around the globe, but many of them are having very little progress especially after the Doha round. To whom should we blame for this?
Well, the Doha round is, I believe, 140 countries. It's very difficult to get 140 countries to agree. And everyone has someone to blame, but I think we have to blame everyone. We have to blame ourselves. We weren't able to achieve that. As a result of that, bilateral free trade agreements have become more prevalent. Regional trade agreements have become more prevalent. So the world is moving forward. Even though the WTO has not been able to bring the world together, countries have moved forward and started and continued to negotiate agreements amongst themselves. One way to reach the same goal would be, for example, if we were to do something like combine TPP and the ASEAN +3, or one day have NAFTA and ASEAN +3, that sort of thing where we bring countries together without having to rely on the Doha process, which has been stalled.
Again, that will add more members into this package, which means tougher talk.
Yes, the more members you have, the more difficult it is. That's why the easy thing is bilateral free trade agreements. And because Doha failed, then countries have moved to the easy part. The next level is regional. That's harder, but it's still not as difficult as a worldwide agreement, which is, we found out, incredibly difficult to do in this day and age. So I think we will continue to see bilateral and region-to-region type of agreements.
So correct me if I understand this wrong. The bilateral trade agreement was not the back option for the Doha round, rather than it's a foundation of the international agreement.
Well, the Doha round was intended to eliminate the need for bilateral agreements, or to reduce the need for bilateral agreements. Because there is no Doha round, there is no WTO agreement, then countries have resorted to bilateral free trade agreements. The world can't stand still while we wait for the WTO to achieve some kind of an agreement. So the world has moved forward, and it's moved forward through bilateral agreements and regional agreements. And we're going to continue to see that. Countries will not wait for the WTO.
Right. Is the growing protectionism among the states, the member states of the WTO and other regional organizations, the major reason why they couldn't come on the same page?
Well, every country has a very special industry, and it's that special industry that usually gets in the way of an agreement. So, and those have been industries that have been in place for many years, industries that are strategic or that mean a lot to that specific country. And it's when you get into that detail that these agreements break down. Now, as a result of the financial crisis, the so-called Great Recession, countries did become more protectionist. I think we're beginning to see the end of that. but there was a move toward protecting one's economy when the crisis began.
Mm-hmm. Let's move our vision to China. As a long observer of China's economy, where do you think the economy is go over the next 5 years?
Well, there are several things that are happening that are very interesting in terms of the Chinese economy. China, of course, let in a lot of multinational companies, and those companies have sparked Chinese competition. And I believe that they have made these Chinese companies ready to compete globally, because they have had to compete with very successful multinational companies in China. So what we're seeing today is Chinese companies going global. And there are Chinese brands that are beginning to become global brands. That process is just beginning, but that will continue. And that is one of the big trends that I see in the next level of Chinese growth and Chinese reform, would be these large global companies, or large Chinese companies becoming global companies.
No matter if it's a state-owned company or private
Well,
sector?
there are state-owned companies that are becoming global. In some instances, there are concerns at times because of subsidies, or because of whatever benefits they may gain by being government-owned. But there are some state-owned enterprises that are also going global. Right. And that's, I think, a trend. That's something we're going to continue to see.
What do you think is the best way to revive China's economy when the growth is becoming, I should say, sluggish for Chinese understanding? Do you see more stimulus plan will inject into this market if the growth rate is still getting lower?
Well, I wouldn't call 7.5% with 2% inflation something that you have to revive. I think it's something to be very proud of. But to continue that, I think that's the challenge. Is you need to do a little bit of everything. You need to continue to incentivize investment from overseas, continue to encourage domestic consumption, continue to encourage companies to go global, take advantage of the shale revolution, all the things that are available today, to continue to do them at a fast pace so that the growth rate doesn't decline. But I would make no apologies whatsoever for a 7.5% growth rate with 2% inflation, which I think is an incredible feat.
All right, good, Mr. Gutierrez. That's all my questions, and welcome to China again.
Thank you.